After nearly 2 years of investigation and 6 months of litigation, everything seemed to be coming to a close. The charges had been widely publicized: money laundering, illegal antiquities, trafficking, tax evasion, and the use of offshore companies to manipulate financial transactions. The prosecutor's presentation had ended. The defense attorney made their final statement. His family sat silently behind, waiting for the verdict that would decide the rest of Rick's life. But just 5 minutes before the judge was about to enter to announce the sentence, the door to the courtroom suddenly swung open. An FBI agent rushed in looking tense and whispered something into the prosecutor's ear. The entire court immediately went into a stir. The verdict was postponed, a rare decision to make at the final stages of a federal case. Why the FBI had just completed a search of Rick Harrison's private jet, an asset that had not been thoroughly investigated before, and what they found inside turned the entire case on its head. A USB drive containing cryptocurrency transactions linked to suspicious offshore accounts, an ancient map with symbols related to stolen Egyptian artifacts, a notebook with encrypted notes that no one could immediately decipher, and most notably, a hidden compartment behind the cockpit that no one knew about, not even Rick's lawyers. Rick Harrison, once facing a life sentence, now had to confront an entirely different fate. So what exactly was found? Could it prove his innocence, or would it add more guilt to his charges? Let's find out. One shocking discovery. All the details of these allegations had been publicly disclosed throughout the trial with constant media coverage. There was hardly anything left to hide. Everything seemed exposed, until Rick's private jet unexpectedly became the focus of attention. Previously, the Gulfstream G550, valued at $38 million, had only been mentioned in the asset records as a means of personal and business transportation. No one thought it could be a key element in the case. Rick Harrison, the man who had made millions of American viewers laugh every week with his fascinating historical stories and witty remarks on Pawn Stars, was now a defendant facing serious charges: tax evasion, money laundering, illegal antiquities, trade, financial manipulation through offshore companies, and even possible connections to organizations monitored by the U.S. Department of the Treasury. A life sentence without parole seemed to be the outcome that most legal experts and the public had predicted from the start. By that morning, when an FBI agent suddenly stormed into the courtroom just 5 minutes before the verdict was to be announced, Rick Harrison's case seemed to be nearing its conclusion. After nearly 2 years of investigation, 6 months of legal debates, hundreds of pages of documents, 38 witnesses, and numerous complex financial analyses, it all appeared to lead to one unalterable conclusion: Rick Harrison had committed the crime. Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, and the testimonies of at least 3 former managerial staff members who had worked in Rick's stores. Some stated that they had handled shipments of unclear origin, which Rick personally brought back after each of his private flights. The defense attorneys countered, claiming that this testimony is inconsistent, coming from individuals with personal motives. This action would open up an entirely new chapter in a case that had seemed all but over. To truly understand the shock brought by this discovery, it's necessary to look back at the context of the entire case during the final week before the verdict was handed down. The prosecution had completed all of its arguments. All the charges were backed by data from the IRS reports from FinCEN, the U.S. The unexpected search took place after an anonymous email was sent to the FBI. Just 3 days before the verdict was to be announced, the content of the email was brief. Rick doesn't hide everything in the office or store. Check the aircraft's cargo hold. The email had no clear IP address, nor did it include any evidence. Yet it led the lead investigator to request an emergency search warrant from the court, partly because the jet was registered under a parent company in Panama, making it legally difficult to trace. The other reason was that the investigative team had focused on domestic companies where suspicious transactions were more frequent. However, as one experienced investigator had once said, the most sophisticated criminals always know how to hide important things in the places people least expect. No one touched it. No one questioned it. That is until the FBI decided to open the auxiliary compartment behind the cockpit. and suddenly all previous assumptions became uncertain. At that moment, Rick Harrison was no longer just a defendant awaiting his verdict. He had become the center of a much larger question. Was he the mastermind? Or was he just a pawn being used as a scapegoat to cover up something much bigger? Opponents argued that Rick was too knowledgeable about the antiques industry not to realize that he was part of a supply chain for illegal cultural goods. A person who can appraise an ancient Greek coin in 3 minutes cannot claim they didn't know. The item had shady origins. A Smithsonian expert commented on NPR. While public opinion remained divided, the plane, a symbol of wealth, power, and privacy, remained motionless in a hangar at a private airport on the outskirts of Las Vegas. His legal team built a strategy to portray Rick as an ethical symbol, a father, a television star, and a citizen caught in the complex web of the global financial system that he could not control. Part of the public showed sympathy. Rick's supporting forums strongly circulated theories that he was being punished for not playing by the rules of the big media. However, at the same time, skepticism also grew. However, the financial evidence, with money flowing through 7 accounts in places like the Cayman Islands, Belize, and Malta, seemed to go beyond any possibility of denial. Rick chose to defend himself through his image rather than through data. He appeared in court with a strong attitude, asserting that he was just a passionate antiques dealer, and denied all the systemic accusations. 8 million, made through anonymous wallets within a largely unregulated blockchain system, particularly Monero and Tether. These wallets were linked to accounts of a financial company based in Cyprus, which had been under surveillance by European authorities for involvement in the illegal trade of historical artifacts. One of the accounts had even been used to pay for a special shipment sent from Egypt, according to emails recovered from the metadata in the file. Inside the narrow space, they found 3 pieces of evidence, small, silent, yet capable of completely unraveling the logic of the investigation that had been followed so far. The first piece of evidence was a USB drive no bigger than a fingertip, hidden inside the technical compartment, one that only maintenance staff were authorized to open. After decoding it in the electronic analysis room, the agents discovered a series of cryptocurrency transactions worth more than $3. No one on the special task force investigating Rick Harrison's case, not even the most seasoned officers, had ever suspected that his private jet would turn out to be the final key to the entire case. In fact, according to an inside source from the FBI, the jet had previously been considered a minor detail. However, everything changed dramatically at 3:37 a.m. when the special investigation team gained access to the rear compartment behind the cockpit of Rick Harrison's Gulfstream G550. 2. Inside the aircraft. The FBI's findings. This led experts to begin suspecting that each artifact traded through Rick's store not only had material value, but could also serve as a means to activate information, transmit instructions, or even unlock some kind of crucial data. After 2 days of analysis, the FBI's digital linguist confirmed that this was a form of cyclic encryption following a physical chain system, a code used during the Cold War for internal communications, where a specific object such as an artifact would serve as the key to decryption. What raised further suspicion was the inscription on the back of the map in Italian. The handwriting faded, but still legible. Do not leave a trace. Use the southern route. Then, the third piece of evidence froze the atmosphere among the investigation team. It was a small black notebook without a name or logo, containing nothing but coded messages that did not follow any of the commonly used civilian encryption systems. The second piece of evidence was an ancient sheepskin map with markings done in red ink. This map was not simply a collector's item. It was confirmed to be a replica of the topographical survey map stored by the Cairo Museum, which had been stolen from the archive in 2016. The map had 2 red circles drawn by hand, accompanied by Greek symbols, roughly translated as intersection, transport, destination. When the FBI traced the contractors involved, they discovered that the entire maintenance process had been handled by a third party. a shell company with no actual office existing only on paper in Dubai. This is the moment when suspicion shifted from Rick committing a simple isolated crime to a larger hypothesis. Rick could be under manipulation, or even functioning as a low-level link in a global network of antiquities, money, information trafficking. However, the key element lies not in the evidence that was collected, but in the secret compartment located behind the cockpit where all the aforementioned items were stored. According to the maintenance records for the Gulfstream G550, this compartment was not part of the original design, but was added following a security upgrade in 2021 at a technical facility in Abu Dhabi, with destinations spanning from North Africa, Turkey, Greece, and Spain to Portugal. These were all hotspots for illicit artifact trafficking, according to reports from UNESCO and Interpol. Notably, some of the flights did not land through the main customs gates. Instead, they used private runways or special forwarding services at private airports. This meant that everything had been handled internally and had not undergone full customs inspection. At this point, two major questions arose. 1. Why did Rick have these items on his private jet? And why had no one, including his defense lawyer, ever mentioned them? 2. Were these pieces of evidence incriminating, or were they a warning about a larger organization hidden behind the accusations targeting Rick? The first question became even more pressing when the FBI confirmed that Rick had used the jet at least 23 times in the past 2 years. What was found in the plane not only provided further evidence but also opened up an entirely new line of investigation, one where Rick Harrison is no longer the focus of the trial, but could potentially be the key to exposing an entire network of power. However, when the FBI released GPS data and navigation logs showing that Rick was directly in charge of these flights, that argument quickly collapsed. Public opinion was left in shock, and legal experts began retracting their confident statements about an irreversible life sentence. CNN asked the question, is Rick a smuggler or a courier of secret codes? Meanwhile, right-wing news outlets like Fox News pushed the theory that Rick might have been set up by international forces for refusing to participate in the global commercial media model. Amidst all the noise, Rick remained silent. His lawyer only made a brief statement. Those items do not belong to our client. The plane is a long-term leased asset used by multiple parties. We demand a full investigation. A source within the FBI revealed, no one installs an encrypted compartment in the back of a plane just to store maps. This is no longer about artifacts or taxes. It could be a switching system, where each antique is a physical data packet. This leak quickly sparked a heated debate in the media. As a result, a small shockwave occurred within the investigation team when previously overlooked clues unexpectedly matched what had just been discovered. The first sign to be unearthed again was a series of unusual short international calls from Rick's personal phone, made between September 2021 and April 2022. Each of these calls lasted less than 90 seconds, took place around 2-3 a.m. local time, and were directed to phone numbers in Turkey, Tunisia, and Greece. The investigation was temporarily halted for 48 hours after the aircraft search was completed to allow for the reanalysis of the entire chain of evidence. Leading the review team was senior agent William Reeves, who had previously broken an international art trafficking case in Florence in 2015. He instructed the analysis team to reopen all reports that had been stamped irrelevant. Immediately after discovering 3 important pieces of evidence inside the secret compartment of Rick Harrison's airplane, the FBI quickly realized that the entire case needed to be re-examined from the beginning. In major cases, reviewing old data is usually just a formality. However, in this case, every detail, once considered insignificant, even speculative, suddenly became frightening when placed in the right context due to its level of accuracy. 3. FBI reopens the investigation. Previously overlooked clues. What's noteworthy is that the map contained a special symbol, a small square between 2 landmark points, and this very symbol had been found in the missing artifacts file from the Topkapi Museum in Istanbul since 2017. Not stopping there, the FBI also discovered a series of small transfers, each amounting to only a few thousand USD, but occurring regularly every 2 weeks. The letter had been submitted to the court by Rick's lawyer at the time, but was deemed legally irrelevant due to the lack of supporting evidence. However, after the discovery of an ancient map in the plane's compartment, coinciding with Rick's flight from Istanbul to Las Vegas, the content of the letter was immediately activated. This meant that Rick landed and almost immediately contacted international contacts during the night via encrypted communications. Another sign that had been overlooked was an anonymous letter sent to Rick's lawyer's office in July 2022 when the case entered the evidence collection phase. The letter warned, "Check everything Rick brought from Istanbul. It's not just antiques. It's a message." Earlier, the investigation team had discarded these calls, assuming they were simply location calls, possibly made by an assistant or automated device. However, after decrypting the IP address data from satellite signal packets related to the Gulfstream G550, the FBI determined that these calls occurred precisely when Rick was taking his personal flights, even down to the exact minute. However, the FBI also could not deny that Rick had used this plane 23 times over the past 2 years, without ever noticing the existence of the hidden compartment, a possibility that is hard to accept for a meticulous person like him. In a subsequent internal meeting, a special report was submitted to the US. The contract for upgrading the auxiliary cabin in 2021 was not in Rick Harrison's name, but rather that of an engineering company based in Dubai, a company that didn't exist in reality, only a name purchased through a middleman. This raised the suspicion that the secret compartment containing the evidence may not have been a request from Rick. One expert from the analysis team remarked, "This resembles a fully operational system, but instead of using software, they are using antiquities as a means of conveying information." Another shock came from reviewing the maintenance and installation records for the aircraft. Initially, these transactions were dismissed due to their small amounts, which seemed too insignificant to be linked to money laundering activities. However, when the team cross-referenced them with the codes in the notebook found on the plane, they uncovered a repeating pattern. Each transfer cycle coincided with a string of encrypted characters formatted as timestamps, likely representing shipment orders or task execution markers. 4. Is this a conspiracy or simply Rick's way of concealing his crimes? Ultimately, all attention turned to one question. Is there an underground organization using Rick, or manipulating him, to transport not only antiquities but also sensitive information related to assets, politics, or industrial secrets? And if so, then Rick Harrison's case may just be the tip of an iceberg, the full extent of which remains unknown and has yet to be fully grasped. Meanwhile, the New York Times, citing sources from the FBI, reported that they were considering elevating Rick Harrison's case to the level of international coordinated investigation involving Interpol and global cultural preservation organizations. Department of Justice with the hauntingly brief title, Investigation Target, Rick Harrison, Criminal Victim or Unwitting Transporter. This question immediately drew the attention of the media when several details from the report were leaked to the press. An article in The Atlantic referred to Rick as the first icon of the American reality TV generation dragged into an intelligence battle involving cultural property. Each item was personally appraised, valued, and traded by him at a pace that left even seasoned archaeologists astonished. His knowledge of history is undisputed, and his understanding of international antiquities trade laws is widely respected within the industry. Re-examining the entire incident from a new perspective, that Rick not only was fully aware of his actions, but also executed them with near-perfect precision, paints a chilling picture over more than 14 years of leading the show. Pawn Stars. Rick had the opportunity to handle thousands of artifacts from ancient Roman coins, Greek pottery and Southeast Asian Buddha statues to weaponry from the American Civil War. The media no longer emphasized the phrase "life sentence looming," but instead shifted to ambiguous headlines that raised numerous questions. Rick Harrison, shadowy kingpin or manipulated pawn. Evidence found on private jet. Incriminating proof or preset trap. These sensational headlines were not merely clickbait. They accurately reflected the dilemma faced by the federal investigative team, a case presenting two opposing possibilities, each fraught with significant risk. Since the discovery of 3 pieces of evidence hidden within the secret compartment of Rick Harrison's private jet was made public, the entire course of the investigation, which had previously seemed to have reached a dead end, suddenly became as obscured as a fogged-up window. This suggests that the map was not merely a collectible, but a tool used to carry out specific missions. While this stance previously earned him praise as a man of principle, it is now being interpreted differently as someone who knows precisely how to safeguard his reputation, possibly because it serves as the perfect cover for illicit activities. Furthermore, the ancient map discovered on the plane contained handwritten notes, including unique symbols that, according to a cryptography expert from the Smithsonian Institution, are likely tactical instructions for transportation routes. Each flight represented a complete contract, encoded through the artifacts, with Rick acting as the intermediary, leveraging the legitimate fronts of his pawnshop, television show, and personal reputation. A detail that adds weight to this theory is Rick's meticulous control over his public image over the years. He has consistently been selective about interviews, declined numerous brand partnership offers, and once firmly stated, "I don't sell my soul to any corporation." Given this, how could someone like him accidentally transport a stolen ancient map or fail to notice a USB drive containing data on illicit blockchain transactions? Proponents of this theory argue that the aircraft was not merely a means of transportation, but a link in a covert logistics network, where artifacts served not just as commodities, but also as coded signals, information keys, and clandestine communication tools among various interest groups. That compartment was added during an aircraft upgrade in 2021 in Abu Dhabi, carried out by a shell company whose identity remains unknown, something an average person would have little control over unless they possessed deep expertise in international aircraft registration systems. If someone really wanted to frame Rick, his personal jet would be the ideal setting, private, secluded, and easily legitimized through the veil of an offshore company. On the other hand, a second school of thought argues that Rick Harrison is in fact the perfect target, someone who was lured into an intricately calculated trap that's almost too precise to believe. According to this perspective, Rick had no knowledge whatsoever of the hidden compartment on his private jet, to the point of remembering every scratch on antique firearms, not be aware of a sizable storage space within the very plane he frequently uses. A seasoned investigative journalist from Vice concluded this theory with a chilling statement: Rick Harrison isn't a victim of the system. He's the man who rewrote how that system works from the shadows. Advocates of this line of reasoning also highlight the most glaring inconsistency in Rick's explanation if the secret compartment was indeed installed by a third party. How could Rick, a man renowned for his meticulousness? While some former employees expressed doubts, none were able to provide physical evidence directly linking Rick to any illegal import orders. His legal team emphasized that all import documents had been signed either by subordinate managers or external partners, not Rick personally. And what truly makes this theory compelling is the raw emotion Rick displayed during the trial. Blaming someone who already has a well-established public image wasn't just easy. It was also strategically beneficial in terms of media optics, public opinion, and even psychological impact. Once Rick is taken down, who would still bother to look behind the curtain? Supporters of Rick have also raised a strong argument. The artifacts suspected of being smuggled were never proven to have been brought in by Rick himself. The fact that the USB was found in a place that was visible yet not overtly suspicious suggests a deliberate move to steer the investigation, much like how underground groups often lay bait to mislead and misdirect. What's more, from the very beginning of the case, Rick was the person under the closest media scrutiny. His public profile, transparent schedule, and more than 2 decades of professional history laid bare. One crucial point: the blockchain transactions discovered on the USB drive were not registered under Rick's name. Instead, they were linked to a legal entity acting as a middleman. one that had vague ties to organizations whose assets had previously been frozen during international investigations. 5. The suspended hearing. A silence. Amid the media storm, as prosecutors continue trying to uncover Rick's actual role in the entire ordeal, social media, the press and even experts remain trapped in a loop circling the same unanswered question. Who is Rick Harrison really? A victim or a perpetrator? Or perhaps both? In a private interview with Foreign Policy magazine, a former European director of antiquities trafficking investigations offered a haunting reflection. In this business, every artifact has two stories, one to tell the public and one that runs in the shadows. Rick might be standing right at the edge between those two, and that's the worst place to be. Tears streamed down his face. His voice trembled, and his emotional declaration, "I don't regret living as my true self," didn't resemble the usual defense of a hardened criminal. It felt more like the reaction of someone who had been swept into a game far beyond their control. Or worse, someone who never even realized they were part of it. However, the truly disturbing part isn't whether one theory is right or wrong. It's that both arguments sound dangerously plausible. And just like that, a power vacuum began to form. While the court remained silent, the media swiftly filled the void. In less than 24 hours after news broke of an ancient map, a USB containing cryptocurrency data, and a handwritten encryption notebook found on the aircraft online forums exploded with a flood of theories, analyses, and endless debates. On TikTok, countless videos dissecting Rick's body language and facial expressions in court were widely shared. The presiding judge issued an indefinite postponement of the sentencing, a highly unusual but widely considered necessary move to assess the significance and potential impact of the newly uncovered data. Although the prosecution strongly objected to the delay, they lacked sufficient legal grounds to prevent further investigation. The courtroom was immediately closed, and all case files were temporarily sealed in preparation for an additional hearing. This wasn't just a criminal trial. It felt like a reality show come to life where the main character, someone viewers had long believed they understood, suddenly made them question everything. Have I been wrong about this person all along? As soon as the FBI revealed the evidence they had retrieved from Rick's private jet. The last time a federal court postponed sentencing at the very last minute, due to the sudden appearance of new evidence according to archived records from the Department of Justice, was back in 2003, in a case involving a bank executive suspected of laundering money through the purchase of European paintings. So when Rick Harrison's case followed a strikingly similar pattern, the public wasn't just shocked. They were thrown into a state of confusion. However, when the trial was suddenly postponed and public opinion became fiercely divided, his son, Corey Big Hoss Harrison, made his first public appearance speaking to the press with strong emotions. "I've always believed my father isn't a bad person, but if what they found is real, I want to know who put it there, because my dad doesn't live alone in this world." NBC, on the other hand, adopted a more neutral tone, organizing live panel discussions with criminal attorneys and international law experts to carefully dissect every legal angle that could potentially turn the case on its head. Amid the media frenzy, another voice gradually began to draw more attention: Rick Harrison's family. For a long time, Rick's loved ones had remained almost completely silent. CNN released a 4-part investigative series titled Rick's Fall, featuring interviews with criminologists, antiquities historians, and former FBI agents to examine two primary scenarios. Either Rick was the mastermind behind it all, or he was the victim of an elaborate setup. Meanwhile, Fox News took a distinctly political stance, portraying Rick as a patriotic American entrepreneur being targeted by global elites because he refused to bow to mainstream media. Many users insisted the look in his eyes when he said, "I have no regrets," didn't seem like the look of someone who's lying. Some of those clips amassed millions of views within just a few hours. The reaction wasn't limited to social media. Major news outlets quickly jumped into the fray. Though this claim has yet to be verified, It was enough to shift the media battle beyond the bounds of a courtroom, turning it into a symbol of the murkiness and complexity of justice in the age of hyperconnectivity. At that moment, Rick Harrison was no longer simply a man on trial. While Rick himself had yet to make any public statements since the initial hearing, his legal team had quietly begun rebuilding their entire defense strategy. One member of that team, speaking on condition of anonymity, shared, "We're no longer just a legal team defending one man. We're now tracking the roots of what may be a much broader criminal network, possibly larger than Rick, maybe even bigger than the United States." A source close to the family revealed that tensions had started brewing within the household. Corey wanted to bring everything into the open, working with an independent legal team to reassess the entire situation. On the other hand, a few other family members believed it was better to stay silent, to protect what little reputation they had left, especially considering the future of the gold and silver pawn shop, once seen as the family's legacy. His words not only reflected a deep trust in his father, but also opened the door to a potential investigation into where the real responsibility lies. Rick's wife, who rarely steps into the public eye, also released a personal statement. She didn't fully defend her husband, but emphasized, "Rick isn't naive, but he's not stupid either. If he knew he was being pulled into something, he would have come forward about it instead of hiding." However, unlike the earlier proceedings where old charges like tax evasion or illegal trafficking of antiquities dominated the narrative, this hearing centered on a new, straightforward, yet highly divisive question. Who truly owned the items found on the aircraft? And did Rick know about their existence? Rick Harrison made his first public appearance since the aircraft evidence was brought to light. The supplementary hearing was scheduled just 1 week after the previous trial was postponed. Once again, the federal court in Nevada became the focal point of nationwide attention. 6. The final battle. Truth or an elaborate deception. He had become a multi-layered figure, a well-known TV personality, a possible criminal suspect, a potential victim of entrapment, a media phenomenon ripe for manipulation, and a person torn between his own truth and the harsh judgments of the public. The trial was put on hold, but the court of public opinion never paused. They presented evidence claiming that Rick had personally used that very compartment on 3 separate occasions to store what they described as personal electronic devices. This claim was based on testimony from a maintenance worker who had previously been employed by the private jet service company Rick had contracted. The witness stated clearly that he had seen Rick open that compartment and place a gray metallic suitcase inside. Rick's legal team responded immediately. Moreover, the office address listed in the contract turned out to be nothing more than a virtual mailbox located in Dubai. These details raised a chilling possibility a group may have deliberately added an illegal storage compartment to Rick's private plane, potentially without his knowledge at all. The prosecution, however, quickly countered with a rebuttal. Rick's testimony was presented simultaneously with a technical report from the FBI. According to the report, the hidden compartment inside the aircraft had been installed during a maintenance session in June 2021 at an aviation engineering facility in Abu Dhabi. However, the company responsible for the installation, Global Sky Parts Limited, was not listed in any international commercial registration system. He looked noticeably worn out, a stark contrast to the composed and firm image he had projected in the earlier sentencing hearing. While the determination had faded from his face, his voice remained steady, and he didn't avert his eyes. Addressing the jury directly, Rick stated, "I had absolutely no idea what was hidden in that compartment. If I had known, I wouldn't have stayed silent. I would have spoken up from the beginning." This revelation sparked deeper suspicion. Not only might Jason have been involved, but he could have played a coordinating role, or even been a key link in the entire operation. At a critical moment, a message recovered by the FBI from the satellite system of an airplane became the most devastating blow to Rick's image. The message was sent from a personal device registered under the username RH Command, linked to the aircraft's satellite IP address during a flight to Malta. Rick was not involved in decisions about maintenance, interior layout, or storage placement. He simply used the aircraft as a regular client. However, prosecutors were quick to dismantle this testimony. They presented evidence that the same bank account where Jason received his salary had also received funds traced from a crypto wallet discovered on a USB drive. Tensions escalated further when Rick's legal team unexpectedly introduced a new witness, Jason Laird, a former flight operations assistant who was previously responsible for coordinating Rick's travel schedule. Jason insisted that Rick had never directly accessed the hidden compartment and elaborated. All logistics were handled by a third-party service. They argued that the witness in question had a prior contractual dispute with the company Rick had hired and may have had personal motives for fabricating a damaging statement. Furthermore, security cameras at the airport for all 3 relevant flights failed to capture any footage of Rick opening the compartment because the maintenance area fell within a blind spot beyond the range of the cameras. Supporters of Rick launched a new hashtag Justice Over Judgment, urging people not to make conclusions without new concrete evidence. Opponents responded with an image of Rick standing next to an old map accompanied by the caption, "A map that speaks AUSB that writes, and a boss pretending not to know." The court has yet to issue a new ruling. The investigation is ongoing. On the other hand, Professor Nadia Morales, an expert in international criminal law at Stanford University, argued, "The structure of this case resembles a modern warfare-style information trap. It's possible Rick got involved without having the full picture, making him both the perpetrator and the victim." Meanwhile, public opinion outside continued to sharply divide. It was an answer that both defended himself and acknowledged the risk involved. In the midst of this tense situation, legal experts were divided. Renowned lawyer Alan Dershowitz commented on NBC Nightline, "Unless there is additional conclusive evidence, this case has now become a battle of credibility, and credibility in the age of social media is something that cannot be controlled." The message read, "Ensure everything is in compartment 3B. Do not leave a log." Although the message did not specify the recipient, the initials RH, matching Rick Harrison's initials, sparked a wave of controversy in the courtroom. The entire courtroom fell silent. Rick remained quiet. When asked about this message, Rick simply replied, "I don't remember sending it. And if I did, I would need to know the context. One sentence can't convict anyone." The evidence recovered from the airplane is still being examined by a team of experts. But this wasn't forgetfulness. It was the stillness of doubt. A pause filled with uncertainty as people began to revisit the case, not through the lens of law, but through the question of trust. Rick Harrison has not yet been formally declared innocent, but he hasn't been convicted again either. On paper, the case remains unresolved. The international investigation into money laundering networks involving historical artifacts is still ongoing. When newspapers stopped publishing daily breaking news about Rick Harrison, when the cameras were packed up and removed from the hallways of the federal courthouse in Nevada, and when the final hearing came to a close without any clear verdict being delivered, something strange happened. Society collectively fell silent. However, everyone understands that this is the final stage of a complex game, where the truth, if it exists, is no longer simply right or wrong. It is wrapped in media coverage, public sentiment, and pieces of the puzzle that may not even fit together. Rick Harrison, a television icon, the defendant in a major case and possibly the central figure in a scenario he never expected, is still standing in the middle of the battlefield. And everyone knows this is the final showdown. Leave a comment below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss any updates from what's turning out to be the most controversial case of the year. To them, Rick was more than just a TV personality. He was memory itself, a father figure, a representation of knowledge and the embodiment of the American dream in the post-2008 era. Self-reliant, intelligent, and unyielding. And that is precisely why this downfall feels so unsettling, to the point where people simply don't want to believe it's real. Yet in the eyes of the public, Rick has already moved beyond the label of defendant. He has become a symbol of a deeper mental challenge when it comes to right and wrong, truth and falsehood, justice and emotion. What do we actually choose to believe? Fans still remember the Rick from years past, the man who smirked at the camera when he came across a Civil War-era rifle, the one who could passionately argue over the worth of an 1880 pocket watch as though it were a national treasure.